As a fitness professional, you know the joy of helping others, and you know it's more than just fitness. We're training the whole person. Wellness coaching provides expertise that goes beyond fitness and nutrition. It's a holistic approach to helping others become their best selves while reaching their goals. To us, there's no greater joy than that. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified wellness coach. Go to nasm.org/wellness.
Well, hello there, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and for much of my 30s, and I would say mostly pre-pandemic, I was super into the idea of biohacking. And I think part of it was that I really liked the idea that I could optimize my physiology, even as somebody with a chronic illness, that I could somehow, transcend this diagnosis that I had. If I just provided all the right stimulus, I could level up to a better version of myself. And my thoughts on those ideas have changed an awful lot. But I do have to give credit. There are certain things that period of my life where I was super into biohacking and super into optimizing exposed me to some very different ideas that have taken root and borne fruit. And one of those ideas is that it changed my idea of what I thought about psychedelics, because up until that point in my life, I kind of thought that it was, just party people and going to raves and hippies. And those are the types of people that do psychedelics. And I was a dare kid and I was never going to do that. But my thinking changed at that time in my life to reconceive of psychedelics as a tool. Right? All of the different psychedelic compounds were tools that you could use to provide a stimulus to resolve a problem. And if you listened to the episode 2 weeks ago, Dr. Steve Thayer, he came on the show to talk about psychedelic assisted therapy. And in that episode, we talked quite a bit about how we got to the place where we see these medicines as criminal, as dangerous, shorthand, the American war on drugs. And for those of us who grew up as the dare kid generation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And also in that episode, Dr. Thayer unpacks for us the current scientific evidence of how psychedelic compounds, psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, ketamine, can be used to treat mental health issues. So acute crises, acute stress and strain, and also chronic issues like PTSD, chronic depression, and suicidal ideation. And as we allude to in that episode, we start with those most intense cases because we needed a pathway to deschedule these drugs, to make them available in a legal way so that they could be used for treatment in controlled ways that were scientifically validated. But what if treatment for mental health problems is not the only use case for psychedelics? You might have heard me say before on the show, the absence of the bad is not the same as the presence of the good. And so focusing on psychedelic use purely for therapy is to focus on the absence of the bad. But what is the upside? What is the presence of the good when it comes to these same compounds? And I have to credit that shift in my thinking completely to today's guest. I had leaned into the idea of psychedelic assisted therapy because it was a comfortable way for me to think about something that I had been socialized to think of as dangerous and bad. And it's like, oh, but if I'm using it to work through depression or PTSD, then it's okay. But I had never allowed myself to turn that last corner. And the thought leader that I've invited on today, he led me to that thought. So Jon Rosenberg's professional history is one of corporate success. He is an accomplished executive. He's got multiple advanced degrees and postgraduate certifications. He is the founder of Strong Point Group and the CEO. But I invited him on to the show today because of this other side of his work as a thought leader in the overlap between psychedelics and well-being. So he wrote his master's capstone for the Applied Positive Psychology program at UPenn about the use of psychedelics to advance well-being. And that is exactly what shifted my thinking and is why I invited him to speak with you today. Jon Rosemberg, welcome to Better Than Fine.
Hey, Darlene, please go on.
Talking about how great you are.
It's such a pleasure to be here. And I love the way you introduced our conversation. And I would like to start by saying that if you can change your beliefs, then you can change your life. And that means you can change the world. And that's the premise that kind of led me to do my work on, or my research around how psychedelics may enhance human flourishing and our ability to thrive. So, as you said, psychedelics have been largely studied to take people from -10 from a crisis or from a psychopathology to zero, to this neutral state. And can they be used? As a matter of fact, they have been used according to what the research and the history tells us, to go from 0 to +10 to help people thrive and find new ways to discover their purpose and meaning in life. So that's all kind of what drove me to do this research.
Yeah, so well put and such an excellent intro. Thank you. What did you say? So if you can change your beliefs, you can change your life, and that means you can change the world.
Yes,
I love it.
yeah,
what a great nugget.
Yeah, and the reason why I landed on beliefs, it's because, well, I'm sure you're familiar with Jared Clifton's work on primals, on primal world beliefs, and it's something that's been, there's more and more studies around the power of beliefs in terms of shaping our lives and shaping the decisions that we make and the choices and ultimately the habits and the thoughts and the spiritual approach that we have to life. Beliefs really drive a lot of who we are as people.
Yeah, I mean, and that even goes all the way back to William James, right? Like variety of religious experiences. He talks about that deep root of belief. And for the listener who doesn't know the work of Jared Clifton, he is also at UPenn, and his construct of primal world beliefs is a validation of this idea of William James's, that we all have these deep rooted foundational beliefs about how reality works. And if we can measure those beliefs, they then affect not just our behavior, but also our well-being and our prospection about the future, the way that we perceive our safety. And then that in turn affects behavior, just like Jon's saying. So Jon, I'm really curious then, you started talking about beliefs. How does that tie into psychedelics? And how does that then tie into well-being? Like, paint us a picture.
What a great question. So what I would say is that my hypothesis when I started writing this paper and doing this research was that shifting beliefs could create a self-fulfilling cycle of well-being. And what I mean by that, I mean, for those who are familiar with Barbara Fredrickson's work and this idea of an upward spiral of well-being, and for me, that it all starts with what we call a self-transcendent experience. And a self-transcendent experience, which is what psychedelics can generate fairly consistently, or at least that's what the research is telling us, that for many people, psychedelics can generate consistently this idea of self-transcendence. That led me to then try and understand what are the psychological mechanisms. We know a lot about how psychedelics behave in our physiological kind of in our bodies and in our systems. We don't really understand what is the cognitive, the psychological process that generates positive outcomes from the use of psychedelics. So we know that other ways to achieve self-transcendence are through flow states, or through awe, or through meditation, or near-death experiences. So it's not exclusive to psychedelics. The power in psychedelics is that it is a substance that you can consume that leads you to this self-transcendent experience.
Well put. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and today we've got a guest, Jon Rosenberg. And we're asking this question, psychedelic assisted well-being? Because you probably heard about psychedelic assisted therapy, but we're taking that up a notch because the absence of the bad ain't the same as the presence of the good. Jon, a moment ago, you mentioned Fredrickson's broaden and build theory. We do have multiple episodes on positive emotion, broaden and build, upward spirals. So for the curious listener, go back in the archives. There's plenty there for you to nerd out super hard. But the thing that we haven't talked about a lot on the show, and in prepping for the episode, I was reading some of the articles that you've written on your concept around psychedelics and well-being. It's self-transcendence. And I alluded to it in the episode with Dr. Thayer, but can you just speak a little bit to what are the hallmarks of a self-transcendent experience and why does it benefit our well-being within your current understanding of it? Because I know that this is pretty emergent, but I'd love to hear your thinking on it.
Sure. So let's talk about how self-transcendent experiences feel first. So some of the things that have been, pointed out in the research is that they create a sense of warmth, of connectedness or interconnectedness, of lightness, of egolessness or ego dissolution, timelessness, love, compassion, joy, freedom, wonder, all of this incredible kind of emotion and physical states can come to life through a self-transcendent experience. And they're also correlated to positive emotions and well-being, altruism, pro-social behavior, being able to take perspective, empathy, life satisfaction. So there's lots of benefits to self-transcendent experiences. And now the question is, how can we reliably induce this self-transcendence? So for some folks, it's about a meditation practice, and that could take years to achieve self-transcendence through a meditation practice. Or for people who write or who have certain activities, who like to cook, flow states could be self-transcendent in many situations, or at least there's a correlation between self-transcendent and flow states. So what psychedelics do is you ingest the substance, whatever this is, and it could lead you, or it may lead you to this sense of self-transcendence. And I think that opens the door to what I call in my research self-distancing. And it's this ability to take like a fly on the wall perspective on things about your life that you may not have seen. It allows you to go from kind of subject to object, to see things from a distance. That's why it's called self-distancing. And that allows us to kind of maybe see something that we didn't see before, and that can lead to positive change. So that's kind of, I know I'm getting maybe a little technical.
No, you're doing great. Great. I do want to leave a few breadcrumbs for our listeners. The first being, just to really drive home the point, you do not need to go take a bunch of mushrooms in order to experience self-transcendence. I will often point to the first time I went to the Grand Canyon. In the episode with Dr. Thayer, I talk about seeing the eclipse. I was in the path of totality for the eclipse and watching like a solar flare in real time. Like that was whoa. I often talk about the birth of a child as a peak experience that's self-transcendent, because suddenly you're responsible for so much more than you were 2 moments ago, right? And so just for the listener, you don't have to take drugs to get there. And this concept of self-distancing, I think, is really interesting because in the research I've read about specifically ketamine, talking about like the dissociative quality of ketamine, where you don't feel so anchored to your body, and then that shifts like self-concept. And so I think this idea of self-distancing, I've also heard it described with MDMA because of its work on serotonin, where problems that feel overwhelming and contentious, especially like MDMA used in couples counseling, you are more readily able to approach problems because they don't feel like they're going to overwhelm you with the attachment and the story. Does that feel accurate to you?
It does, and I think you hit on a very important point, Darlene, which is around the dissociative qualities of these substances, right? We have to be very mindful. This is why it's done within a therapeutic container, right? Because and for people who want to explore this, and I don't want to say, I don't want to tell anybody how to do anything, but I'm saying,
Yep. We talked about gatekeeping with Dr. Thayer. We're not here to keep gates.
exactly. It's really important to have an anchor to what it is that you're trying to accomplish. That's why a lot of times when you talk about psychedelic assisted therapy, there'll be a conversation about what does the preparation look like and what does the integration look like. And, we're on the verge of getting MDMA approved as a treatment for PTSD. The FDA is about to approve this, and it's not being approved as take two and call me in the morning. It's being approved as a therapeutic treatment. So the container in which this exploration occurs is very important, and I think these are not like these are very strong compounds and very powerful substances. So the disclaimer, and they're illegal in most places. So I think the disclaimers are important to bring into base. Also, the research, what's called the psychedelic renaissance, the research that has been done over the past 20 years and in the 60s, it's still nascent. There's a lot more to learn here, right? And we are still kind of initiating the exploration. Now, the mental health crisis that we hear so much about is certainly speeding up the work that's being done in order to help people. So yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you buttoned there, because I could see where some people, whether on our network or fans of the show, are like, why is Darlene talking about drugs so much lately? And it's exactly what you just said. It's having been diagnosed with complex PTSD myself, having struggled with iterative depression myself, periods of pretty significant anxiety, having been in therapy since I was 5 years old, iteratively, I have heard or experienced most of the waves of practice in psychotherapy over the course of my life. I have tried just about every kind of like therapeutic intervention. I think the only thing I haven't really done is EMDR, just because I haven't gotten around to it yet. And with all of that being told, hey, you're going to be dealing with this the rest of your life. We're working on tools so that you can cope. And then seeing the evidence around psychedelics and starting to tiptoe up to that ledge myself and reading the research around it myself. If things are getting worse, we need better tools. And this is another compelling tool in a whole toolbox, right? Nobody is implying that the psychedelic renaissance is going to completely take out the entire industry around psychotherapy. It's integrated into holistic care as another set of tools. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but that's my big why, is like, things are getting worse. Let's start talking about how we can make them better, because that's what we do as well-being practitioners.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing your story, Darlene. And if I can share part of mine,
Please.
is one of the big reasons why I decided to do this research. My best friend, business partner, last January was diagnosed with liver cancer, and 4 months later he passed. And it was a very grueling time, and we were far apart, and he didn't have access to any of these compounds. And when you think about it, for him, for Nathan to have such a difficult end of life experience and to have to deal with the pain of holding on to his kids and his family, and without having any opportunity to breathe or to actually let it sink in. And it's funny, because at the same time we found out that Roland Griffiths, one of the greatest researchers in the modern psychedelic science, who recently passed away, was also diagnosed with cancer, and he was doing the rounds and doing interviews, and you could hear how he was approaching his end of life, and I could hear how Nathan was approaching his. And to me, it was, how can we not look at this more carefully? And yes, there's lots of stigma. There's lots of dangers too, right? Like it's not like with anything we do, right? Like nothing is 100% guaranteed, and everything has a certain degree of risk. In our case as a society, Jonathan Haidt just published The Anxious Generation, right? Like this just keeps it. So if there is, to your point, if there's one more tool that we can use for certain folks who are a good fit for it, right? And this is where medical professionals and clinicians and the people who are doing the research come into play. If you're a good fit for it, it may be a great opportunity to shift your life. And it's not a panacea. It will not solve your problems. There's a lot of hard work. When you look at folks who have, for example, it's been used a lot for alcohol use disorder. And it's great, and it helps people have another chance. And it still requires lots of work. It requires changing your habits. It requires changing many other aspects of your life. So it's
not a magic wand.
Exactly. It's not a magic wand or a magic pill in this case, but yes.
Yeah. A magic medicine. Yeah. Not everything works for everybody all the time. Right. And if anybody tries to tell you they've got the one secret for everyone, don't give them your money. I say that all the time on socials. You're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My guest is Jon Rosemberg, and we're talking about psychedelic assisted well-being. And yeah, not everything works for everyone all the time. And being appropriate in practice, which I'm so careful about tiptoeing up to the phrasing on it for the same reason that Dr. Thayer is like, we're not trying to gatekeep. These compounds have been used in ceremony, in initiation, in indigenous religious practice for millennia. Last time he talked about Kaikion, which is like my husband, every time we talk about psychedelics, my husband's always like, Kaikion, the Romans. Like, calm down, you're not Gladiator. But I think it's really important that we recognize that we are just at this emergent edge of social acceptance and also evidence-based practice. And I think I also shared in that episode with Dr. Thayer about my own experiences. And I think one of the things that I've really taken away from those experiences is the importance of structured integration. That big, powerful stuff really does come up. It is exhumed and excavated in the journey. And I feel like a lot of people are like, ooh, the journey. But it is like you are walking a path through yourself. And to have the support of a practiced professional to help you weave that insight into a cohesive self and a cohesive life practice, like that's work. This isn't like you drop it once and suddenly you are like the most optimized version of yourself, right? I don't know. Again, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but those are my thoughts.
Absolutely. I think so. So if you think about the self-transcendent experience as the opportunity to self-distance, right? To look at something in your life or many, many things in your life from a different perspective and to challenge those deeply held beliefs, then once you challenge them, you got to figure out, what does that look like? What am I going to replace that with? What is the system that I'm going to use in order to look at my life? And that takes time and effort. And it's interesting because, in doing this work, I've met lots of folks and it's great because you talk to people and you tell them, yeah, I've done some research around this, and people immediately, want to share their story, especially when the outcome has been really positive. And there's a lot of people who sing the gospel of psychedelics, which is great because these are people who feel really good about their. One of the things that always comes to mind for me when people are just coming back from a retreat or just finished the journey itself is, this feeling of peacefulness and of calm. And then for many, not for all, because there's also challenging experiences, and we can put a pin on that one, but for a second. But that's the moment when the real work begins, right? To your
Mm.
point, Darlene, like the integration requires actually processing everything and integrating it into this new self, or this new version of yourself that you're trying to become. And these changes, these adaptive changes that you've chosen to make, now require for you to understand what that means, right? And how does that translate into my day-to-day life? How does that translate into the relationships that I have in my life? How does that translate into how I react and respond to things, and habits? Ultimately, it's about habits, right? So
And my goals and who I want to be when I grow up, the direction of my life. I think I'm thinking back to where we started this conversation, where we talked about beliefs. And so often, like, I'm trained in neurolinguistic programming. I work as a coach. Like, I do a lot of beliefs work anyway. And I've also directly experienced what Dr. Thayer was alluding to, is the malleability, right, that comes with psychedelics. And so if you soften something, right, you make it a little more like Play-Doh and a little less like hard plastic, then we can shape it differently. But that reshaping of belief then results in this shift in behavior, right? And I think that there have been times, people I've known, myself, where you go through an experience like that, and suddenly the life you're living feels a bit uncomfortable because the beliefs have shifted. And I to your point, don't want people to listen to these episodes and think, oh, I'll just feel so much better. Because oftentimes what it does is spark you to change, and change is still hard.
yeah. I think a big word that comes to mind for me is balance, right?
Mm,
So think about this homeostasis, right? If you're living your life in this balanced state of anxiety and depression, and then suddenly, let's say through a self-transcendent experience, and for the sake of our conversation, let's say that that's generated by psychedelics, that level, that balance that you have shifts, right, to a different place. Then you have to figure out how to regulate yourself at that new balance. And that's a challenge, right? It requires a lot of effort and attention to be able to notice what those changes are doing to your life. So yeah, I think this selling of psychedelics as this magic pill, a lot of time it's when the hard work begins. It's like it's a real boost, right? Like you feel this real boost to be able to do the work that you still need to do.
It sometimes feels to me like meditation felt like 10 to 15 years ago, where suddenly everyone was talking about meditation. There were all these new apps and new podcasts, and everyone was meditating. And I know I had a number of clients who were like, I'm doing the meditation and I don't feel the peace. I just want the peace. What am I doing wrong? Give me the one that gives me the peace. And I'm like, oh, that's not what this is for. I'm sorry. like I'm not saying you're never going to get there. I'm just saying there's going to be a lot of work first.
Yeah.
And it does kind of feel that way about psychedelics right now.
Yeah, and meditation is interesting because we translated in the Western world what we believe meditation was, right? And then we created a whole industry around it. And what I've found in my own practice is that meditation is a lot simpler for me than what I thought it was. I thought it was, watching my thoughts pass by, and what is it? At one point, I believed it was about, completely emptying my mind of thoughts. Good luck with
Mm,
that. I have
yep.
an anxious mind that runs really quick, so good luck with that. Eventually, I realized that if I just went for a long walk, physical activity, right, plus being present, and by being present, I mean not getting lost on the train of thought. Like instead of jumping on the train, letting the train pass, to me, that was a meditative state. And that meditative state has allowed me to achieve levels of self-transcendence through walking through a cemetery, which is a crazy thing to say, because I had you know crazy death anxiety a few years ago,
Mm.
until I went on a psychedelic journey that allowed me to face or confront my fear of death, and that has made a huge difference in my life. So but yeah, it took me 2 years to unpack what I experienced on that one session, and it took me 6 months to prepare for it. So what I'm saying is that yes, it is. It could be a fast track. It could help. We know that CBT and a lot of these third wave types of therapies, ACT and DBT and all of the T's,
all of
this,
these,
all
because they
of
all
this.
are therapies. Just for anybody who doesn't know those acronyms, the T is for therapy. That's why they all end in T.
And they're all kind of born from behavior therapy in one way or another, right? We know they're very effective. They can take, for many people, they can take years to actually get them to 0 or to +10. So self-transcendence may be one of the ways to fast track that progress.
Yeah, and it's not always upside, but it is often upside, to your point, if done well with you haven't said the phrase, but I'm going to say it now: set and setting, right? Mindset and the setting with which you are journeying. That is the shorthand for a lot of the things that we're describing. Would you feel comfortable sharing anything more about your journeys? Was it just that one? You've done multiple. I've done 2 so far, both psilocybin.
Let's compare journeys.
Yeah. Inquiring listeners want to know.
I'm going to stick with a few for therapeutic purposes, and they have been quite transformative. And the work that I did leading to them and after them, I think, or this is what I believe, we've been talking about beliefs, was a lot more important to me than the journey itself. So I am grateful for the medicine. I am a lot more grateful for the support that I had around me, my family, my friends, my therapist, like the people, the support network that we have. So we say these are highly pro-social substances. So to me, it was about that. And about, you mentioned set and setting. When it comes to set, to me, when it comes to your mindset, it starts with setting an intention. And by the way, that can be translated to, in my view, to any other thing in life, right? Like, how do we set intentions instead of expectations? And that difference, to me, has been really powerful, because we're so used to this idea of, here's where I want to get and here's what I want to accomplish. And you read my bio at the beginning. I have years in the corporate world, so I've climbed that ladder.
Big deal, Jon.
In every way that I could. Sure. I climbed, and it was all expectation driven. When I did that slight shift from expectation to intention, suddenly a whole world opened up that I had not seen before, right? Because intentions are lightly held, and intentions are more about the meaning and the I don't want to get too out there, but it's a more spiritual way to look at life, right? It's and I don't know how I would define spiritual, so I won't go there, but I will just say
we'll get Dan Tomasulo on for that episode.
Yeah, let's do it. I'd love to. Yeah, I'm listening to that one end to end. I love Dan. So
yeah, me too. But I think, to your point, I think the other thing about intentions is, when we are outcome oriented, when it is goal oriented, there are specific paths that drive us to a specific outcome, whereas intentions are open. Right? If my intention is to show up with an open mind and hold space, well, there's a lot of ways to do that, as opposed to, my intention is to ask Jon these 5 specific questions and we're going to hold to the script and right? Like, that's not malleable, and human life is highly malleable and beyond our control, but we can hold the energy, the woo, the direction of an intention, even through situations that are in flux. And I think that that's one of the things that the 2 experiences that I have had have helped reinforce in my life too.
That's beautiful. And what I would say is that it depends on the level of complexity of what you're dealing with, right? because for certain problems, goal setting can be really useful, right? You say, I'm going to go from this step to this step to this step to this step. When we're talking about well-being specifically, or when we're talking about, this personal growth and this self-exploration, self-actualization, self-transcendence, it seems like goal setting may, at least for me, may not be the best fit. So having a more loosely held approach can be really, really powerful.
Strong agree. So there's a tension in our conversation and the conversation with Dr. Thayer that I want to speak to and get your thoughts on. So we both and Dr. Thayer were very direct about, we don't want to gatekeep. We don't want to tell people they can't do what they're going to do. I know where I live, as THC became legalized, suddenly access to psychedelic compounds became way easier than it had been before, even though they're not technically illegal in the state I live in. I think that there is access, but we also have alluded to, these are powerful compounds. We both have talked about doing them in supervised contexts. We've talked about therapy. So there's a tension there, right? Between here's what the scientific evidence says, here are the therapeutic protocols, here's what responsible use looks like from a therapeutic perspective, but we're not necessarily talking about therapy because it's well-being, but also we don't want to gatekeep. What does responsible use look like when it comes to well-being? Because to me, that's the current gap in the conversation. If right now, as these compounds get rescheduled, that limits it to clinical use, but we're saying there's an above zero upside. And so if I can only get legal access if I'm diagnosed with PTSD or chronic depression, but there's an upside that could be benefit to other people, are you comfortable speaking to that space?
Well, I can talk about it with what we know, which isn't much, right? So when we talk, to your point, when we talk about the science, so here's the thing, right? Science, as we know, is imperfect, and yet it's the best way to acquire knowledge we know, right? As a species, science has been the best way that we have to accumulate knowledge in a way that it's reliable. And at the same time, science has, is evolving so quickly that things we believe to be true 50 years ago, that we could, kind of put money on the bank and say, this is true for sure. Now we know not as much, right?
Oh, and even shorter. I can point to nutrition things that we were convinced of 10, 15 years ago that we now know are bunk.
Yeah. So I'm not even going to go into nutrition.
We don't have to go down that rabbit hole. My point being that 50 years is in some cases too long of a time horizon.
Yeah. So let's say 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I'm sure that 10 or 15 years from now, especially with AI and everything that we're seeing, things that we believe today to be true won't be. So science gives us a great compass or a great map to understanding what may be safe and what may not be safe, right? Ultimately, when it comes to psychedelics, I think it's a very personal choice because there are risks involved. There are lots of risks from challenging experiences, which, by the way, some of the research indicates that even if you go through a challenging experience, or what a lot of people call a bad trip, you can still get some of the positive outcomes from the use of psychedelics. But there are hallucinogenic disorders. There's like what people call flashbacks. There's risk to folks who may have psychosis in their family. There's risk to cardiovascular activity. So there's lots of risk. So for somebody who wants to explore this without an acute need, right? So without the psychopathology diagnosis or whatnot, it's about weighing the risks of going through this versus the potential benefits. So a lot of folks will say, if it ain't broken, don't fix it, right? Other people are kind of like, I want to explore. I want to see what's out there. And that's what leads to self-transcendence. So it's interesting because a while back, somebody asked me, what's the difference between self-actualization and self-transcendence? And I don't know that I can give you a textbook answer. I can give you that for me, after doing all this research, self-actualization, it's about, actualizing yourself and understanding yourself and self-awareness and knowing yourself and knowing what are the things that drive you and your purpose. Self-transcendence is about interconnectedness for me with the rest of the world, the universe, the people around us, and understanding. And now there's more and more science. There's a great book by Neil Thies called On Complexity Theory.
He's been on the show, and he is one of my mentors. He is one of the
He's
people that helped
amazing.
me integrate my last trip. No, he's a good friend. You
But
know, yay! I can't. Dr. Neil, if you're listening, because I know you listen to the show, a fan.
he's
He's
one of my
really good
favorite
friend.
books that I've read in the but it's interesting that now we know, right, that it's not true that we end where our skin ends, right? Like so self-transcendent, I think as we continue to research this space, we'll understand what it really means to be interconnected. And by the way, a lot of folks don't have the time or the space to think about this, and I think it's quite a privilege to be able to spend energy and time and thoughts or meditation or pondering on these big questions about our life in this planet, which by the way is quite short. So
Yeah, quite short, quite beautiful, many opportunities for growth. We didn't talk much about with Dr. Thayer either, just like indigenous practice and psychedelic use. But the bit that I do know, some of what you're describing is bringing up for me this idea that it is a privilege, especially in a capitalist society, to be given the resources where you can work on this stuff and develop yourself and ask yourself what actualization even looks like and worry about transcendence and all of that. But I think of Maria Sarita, who, great grandma of psychedelic in the West, and it was baked into their culture, right? If you were unwell, if you were struggling, the medicine was part of a healing process available to everyone. And so it wasn't privilege in the way that it's privileged now. And I can't help but give a nod to this idea that just because it's privileged right now in our culture doesn't mean it has always been, and it needs to always be. Does that make sense, the thing I'm trying to say?
I think so. I think you make a very good point, and I think we have to give more credit to indigenous cultures that explore this. There's also we don't fully understand much about it, right? Because it's been studied from a Western perspective, right? Like the moment we look at it with our lens, we're already changing it by definition. And I've sat with a couple of elders from different areas here in Canada, just in conversation, and the wisdom is tremendous. And you ask, well, can I share this wisdom? And the response is, as long as you acknowledge that this is not your wisdom, this is not my wisdom, this is the wisdom of my grandmother and my grandmother's grandmother who passed it on to me. So I think we just we try and find ways to simplify this highly complex dynamics into something that's easily digestible. And I think, especially when it comes to psychedelics, that's very dangerous because there is
So
no
much nuance.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to button on, because I do think we do our best in the short space that we're given in an episode to try to give enough nuance that if someone's curious, that they can lean in a bit deeper, and to leave in that space where it's like, hey, in 2 40-minute episodes, can we really unpack all that there is to know? And so I'll send people back to Dr. Thayer's podcast, which is all about the psychedelic exploration that we're currently under. And I'll also point them to the education through Numinous. I know you've done the full coursework. I'm just at the beginning of that journey myself, and it's already provided so much value to the way I'm thinking about psychedelics in my life. And I may never have a legal pathway to practice, but just having that information is empowering. And so the foundations course is free for anybody who wants to do it through Numinous Wellness. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Jon, where can people find you? Oh, sorry, please. Anything you
No,
want to add?
go ahead. My website is Strong Point Group, exactly as it sounds, .ca, and it's CA because I'm in Canada. I'm in Toronto. And You can find me there, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And what I was going to say about the Numinous course, and it was one of the things that really sat with me after I did it. It's this idea of compassion at the center of care. And I think there are many definitions of compassion. I think it's like empathy plus action. That's kind of how I define it. And I that was really powerful for me. And I think to sit with folks or to share with folks around their psychedelic or any other type of self-transcendent experience or any other type of healing work that they're doing, I just think compassion needs to be at the center of it. And we throw this word around quite loosely these days. And I think I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago, and they said, yeah, we can approach this with compassion. I'm like, that's really hard. Compassion is really, really difficult. So let's just acknowledge that it's like level 10, level 50, level 100. I don't know over how many levels there are, but it is a difficult skill to master, or a difficult, I don't know if a skill is too reductionist, but that's how I'm kind of put
state.
it.
We'll go state. Everyone goes state, right? To master.
Yeah,
and
state works.
Yeah, I think that's a great sentiment to recognize that while the goal is well-being, and so many of the topics we talk about on this show, and generally as positive psychology practitioners, which we both are, that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's easy just because it's about happiness and thriving and all of that. Thriving takes work.
Yes.
Thriving is not an easy button. We don't just like practice gratitude every morning and like, boop, there we go. And so many of these things take work. Thank you, Jon, so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And you also are the reason that we were able to get in touch with Dr. Thayer. So thank you for making that connection so that we could do this series. It's really been illuminating. And I've already heard feedback on that episode. So I'm certain that people are going to have thoughts about what we've had to share. And I appreciate it a lot.
I'd love to hear them. And thanks for the invitation and for opening this space for the conversation, Darlene. It's such a joy seeing you. So thank you.
Good to see you too. And of course, listener, if you have feedback, you know that I want it. So if you could send me an email, it's info@darlene.coach. You can find me on the gram. My Instagram is darlene.coach. That's also my website is darlene.coach. If you're a fan of the show, I hope that you've already subscribed. If you are watching on the YouTube, give this a like, a comment, give us a share, go ahead and tag me. And we live stream the show. This will be almost every Wednesday. I'm going to be off next week. Got some travel coming up, but Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'd love to have you join us in the live stream. You can always ask real-time questions of our guests or of me on whatever the topic is. Thank you so much. Take good care of yourself and be well.